All glories to the Assembly. All glories to the Assembly. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glory to Sri Prabhupada. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome back this morning. Thank you for being here. It's becoming, you see, this is a festival, Bhakti Sangam Festival. Everything's becoming more exciting and more enlivening each day. You can see in Bhagavatam class, questions are becoming, everyone sees. Today we had the hot potato, the internet. The internet has become a very touchy subject. It goes way back to Prabhupada. We go back to like 1973. And at that time, there was, of course, no such thing as internet. The word computer was there. I guess there were some things in the military and all, but there was way before cell phones and internet and all these different things that are present now. But there was something that had come out recently. It was called telex. So telex was kind of like your Western Union or something like that. You could send instantaneous messages if you had a telex machine to anyone else that had a telex machine using their address, just like an email address. You had a telex address. So there was these two times, different devotees, they approached Srila Prabhupada once. I was there for one of them. I remember being in Prabhupada's bedroom, and Prabhupada was walking around, and the GBC of the West Coast was in there. His name was Kurandar. 1973, Kurandar was one of the most famous disciples of Srila Prabhupada at that time. He was considered, Kurandar could do anything. He was like, Prabhupada wanted something done, he would ask Kurandar. In fact, Srila Prabhupada himself said, Karandar can do anything. So it didn't come from others, it came from Prabhupada. And he said it to me one day when Prabhupada, he was living on, U.S. we would say the second floor. In India they say the first floor, above the ground floor. So Prabhupada would go flight of stairs to get to his room. So he came down this flight of stairs, and then he would walk along the hall, and then he would go out the back door to his garden. Prabhupada's garden was just like that area to the second post straight over in there. It was just small, but it was very pretty, very beautiful. Lots of flowers, banana trees, magnolia bushes, very fragrant, jasmine, and tulsi devi. So often in Los Angeles, the weather was always LA. One of the reasons LA is because of the weather. It's generally just very nice. It's not hot, it's not cold, it's sunny, very pleasant, except when it's smoggy. But they reduced that over the years. So anyway, when Prabhupada was there, Prabhupada liked to be outside. He wasn't a person that would sit inside all day long. If it was pleasant out, Prabhupada would go sit outside. He enjoyed the fresh air, he enjoyed the sunshine. And sitting under the tree, you can see so many pictures in Los Angeles, Prabhupada sitting under that trellis, and his disciples would come and sit down. So the one day, Prabhupada was going down to the garden, so of course I would follow him down the stairs and open the door, and Prabhupada walked out the door, and there were two steps. There were just two concrete steps that went down from the house level to the ground. And Prabhupada walked down the steps, and then he turned to me. He said, "Do you see these steps?" He said, "Karandar made these steps." He said, "Karandar can do anything." I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." But that's how we felt about Karandar. Very serious, very grave devotee. And he was, in those days, and it still goes on, our tendency is, like we said, we don't want to imitate and we follow the example, but very often we see as devotees, you find a person that you want to emulate, imitate sometimes. So we all knew he was a very fixed up, very advanced, very senior, and we were younger because he was around the devotee for 4 years when I came, so that's forever. Back in 1971, if someone was a Hare Krishna for 4 years, that meant he was a Hare Krishna forever practically compared to you. He was very senior, he had Brahmin thread, chanting Gayatri mantras, secret mantras. And these are all big, big things in those days. So, but he was very serious all the time. So we always, many of us think this is what it means to be Krishna conscious. You don't ever smile. You're just grave, because a devotee's grave, right? Gravity, serious. So he was a Marine. He'd been a Marine, if you know, in the military, Marine. And the Navy, the Army, the Marines were like, and he looked just like that, and he never smiled. So that's what it meant to be Krishna conscious. You did lots of service, you chanted, and you were just very serious all the time. So he came into the room, and he said, Prabhupada had this had a pedestal in the corner, and on it was one of those little clocks that the thing spun around, had like the hourglass on top of it, the glass was covered in glass, it was golden in color, the little thing spun, and you had to wind it every day. I remember winding this thing. And it was there, Karandar came in, and this was the place, he was saying to Prabhupada, he said, we can get a telex machine. And of course, many times people, they would explain things to Prabhupada like he was someone that had no idea about, communications or electronics. Or we didn't realize Prabhupada knew everything. We used to talk to him about medicine like he had no experience. And he was a pharmacist. That's what he did. He had a business, in the pharmacy business. But Prabhupada would allow you to give him information as if he was completely ignorant of it, and he would just go along. So he was describing, this telex and what it could do, and he said, if we have a telex, if we buy a telex machine here, he said, and then, say in London, in New York, they get telex machines, then we can communicate. He said, instantly. He said, they won't have to wait so long for letters back and forth. He said, but instantly we can have communication. And Prabhupada just immediately said, no, we'll just use it for gossip. And that was it. That was the end of instantaneous communication back in 72, 73. And then, a few times different devotees mentioned it. Prabhupada would always say, and he always used that word, Prabhupada would say gossip. Such a wonderful English word, gossip, because it just means talking something really you don't have to know anything about for sure, but it's, it's fun topics. He didn't say Brahmya Katha, he said gossip. He said we used gossip. So that was the end of that. And as the other bar was saying this morning, Prabhupada almost seemed like he was allergic to the telephone. I mean, he would go out of his way not to use the telephone. He was managing a worldwide society. And he didn't like to spend money. Prabhupada was not for wasting a penny, or say a paisa, a penny. He used to send in India, Tejas, Govinda Maharaj just put on Facebook about our god brother Tejas Prabhu. I think he's having open heart surgery or something, so we should all say a prayer for Tejas Prabhu. He did so much service, and still does, but in those days he was in India for years, and he was in Delhi, always making life members, establishing centers, doing so many things, and worked very closely with Srila Prabhupada with the accounts. And Prabhupada was really heavy with Tejas, And when Tejas, he wouldn't even allow him to take the train from Delhi to Vrindavan because it was expensive. In those days, a bus might be 5 rupees or something to hop on the bus from Delhi to Vrindavan. If anyone has been to India, it hasn't changed much. The buses, it's not something you want to do. I was on one here and there, but it's definitely an experience. It's like a carnival ride going on a bus from Delhi to Vrindavan. But he would make Tejas take, he said, you can't spend money on the train. He said, you take the bus. He said, why do you have to do something so? This was Prabhupada's move, but to speak of like a long distance phone call, unheard of. To call Prabhupada up, nobody called. I was with him 2.5 years. And I remember one phone call. It was a very special phone call we could talk about sometime. And then, as special as it was, Prabhupada didn't get on the phone. He told me to take it, see what it was he had to say. It was a call from India. And we were in New Zealand at the time. So Prabhupada said, see what he wants. So Prabhupada just wasn't, he liked letters, and it's such a wonderful meeting. It was so personal, as Prabhupada was. It was personal. Everything's personal. This really is what all this talk is about. And this morning, what all this talk is about is the importance of person, of being personal, and that communication, and actually making relationships, which is something difficult to do when you're sending texts and all these things. There's really no communication that's there between two people. So Prabhupada communicated in a beautiful way with letters. Letters would go to him. And the letter might have to follow him to 3 different cities before it finally found him, because say Prabhupada was in London, you sent a letter to London. By the time it got there, you might be in Vrindavan. And you get a letter to Vrindavan, it's good luck. Someone sent me glasses, and then I never got them. They didn't arrive this past month. So letters or something, when Prabhupada was in, it might take a few weeks. And then it might sit around another week before Prabhupada answered it. You can see in the letters when he said, I received your letter from such and such date. So you can see how long it took from that letter to be written to where Prabhupada's responding, usually because of the process of traveling through the mail. And Prabhupada was just so complete. it always said, received your letter such and such, on December 29th. And then you'll see the ones that say, I received your letter undated, which means you're like, it's almost like not that he was insulting, but it's like an insult. It means you don't even put a date on a letter. Again, this is like human life, Prabhupada was into everything carefully done, everything with consciousness, everything with care. Because his letter always had the date on it. And he always said, I received your letter. And then he would answer every point in the letter. And there's such a wonderful thing that in my book I have there, I put one of Prabhupada's letters in the book. It was one of my favorite letters. And it was to Tushya Krishna, Prabhupada's disciple who was very influential in Australia and New Zealand, and then became sannyasi. But he asked Prabhupada, in this one letter, he asked Prabhupada about 6 or 7 questions. And Srila Prabhupada answered every one of the questions. And he didn't answer them on the basis of what he felt perhaps was most important, because when you read the letter, some questions are definitely of more concern than others are. But Prabhupada just, as it was asked, Prabhupada answered the question, whether it's short answer, long answer. He would just go through with this like in a detached but caring way. He answered all of his questions as he would do with all his disciples. He said, that's my duty. As we talk about this is what it's all about, is carrying out our duty. Yesterday we were speaking towards the end about association, how to have the association of Srila Prabhupada, how to have the association with the spiritual master. And we understand Prabhupada is here. He's here with us. And how is it he's here? It's one of the very basic points in Krishna consciousness. How is the spiritual master present eternally? To his instructions, right? Vapu, Vani and Vapu. So he lives forever in his instructions. So then how do you associate with him? How do you have his association?
By following.
You have to follow his instructions. And if you don't follow, you can have all the sentiment in the world, but you don't have this association. But if you follow, if you're sincerely following everything, reading, trying to follow his instructions, you made them clear in the first day, what we call the routine things. These are his basic instructions. Everything else, everyone has something different they need to do. Everyone has their services. And generally your service is right in front of you. You don't have to look far. You don't have to travel to another land or another city. Your service is right there. Right in front of you, you have your service to do. So you follow the instructions, then you have Prabhupada's association. And you can experience that by doing it. One thing, when I started writing in about 1995, and actually I started writing my book because of the internet back in those days. So 1995, was that 17 years ago? Yeah, 17 years ago is when I started writing. So I was new at that time on the internet. There was a thing that was called AOL, America Online. It was like the internet place in America. So somehow I found myself on the internet. I had no idea even how to use a computer. But within a short time I found myself too, they had these Yahoo groups, they were called, groups. And I found myself going to this group because I saw it said Prabhupada. It said Prabhupada Kata. So I thought, great, talking about Prabhupada. So I, clicked on a folder and I started reading these things, and the first thing I got to read about was all nonsense. It was gossip. That was my introduction to the internet and spiritual life, was reading about, and it's people arguing philosophy over Ritvikism. This is what it was about. And I became just so disappointed. For me, it wasn't even something to argue about. It seemed like a common sense affair back then. But first I just got disappointed, then I got upset. And I thought, oh, I'll do something. See, this is what we can do. Not just sit back and say, this is terrible, this is terrible. Do something positive. This is what Srila Prabhupada, this was his process. Like he said he said, I'm always for cooperation with everyone. He says, and personally, he says, I do not criticize anyone. He said, I don't have time to criticize. He said, I have too much to do, too much service to do. So this is how a devotee deals with things. You're too busy. But this is what was going on here. It was back and forth. It was criticism. So I thought, well, I'm going to do something. And it wasn't respond. I didn't respond to anything. Because to me, these things, no one ever listened to anyone else. It's who can, shout the loudest gets heard, although it goes right through. And everybody just waits for their turn to talk. And then when you're finished, then I'll start talking. I'm not really listening to you, but I'm waiting for you to be done all your nonsense so I can say what's right. So I had a group of letters that I had written when I was Prabhupada's servant. The very first days I was with him, I was in Vrindavan during Kartik, and I used to write letters and send them to Kuladri, my godbrother in New Vrindavan. And in these letters I would just say, today Prabhupada did this, Prabhupada said this. Brahmachari came in the room one day, he said, the Brahmachari came in the room and he's sitting in front of Prabhupada, and he said, Prabhupada, he said, how do I control my mind when I'm chanting japa? And Prabhupada said, there's no question of mind. He said, you chant with the tongue and you hear with your ears. And that was it. That was it. Just one sentence. Imagine we have seminars about controlling the mind, right? How to chant. But this was Prabhupada's statement. He said, in other words, there is no mind, just forget it. He said, you chant and you hear. And that was it. So I put this in the letter. And I used to send it to Kuladri and New Vrindavan, and he would send it out to other people. And this was early days of Prabhupada Katha going on. So I got those letters, and every day I went on to this site, and I would put one or two lines from these letters, because I wanted to just, a little bit at a time. I didn't want to send it all out at once. And that became the start of me writing my book. I actually wrote it for the internet. I wrote it on the internet. And gradually people would send me, this was very early, I didn't know anything, but, people said, please send it to me. So then after a while I had like 50 addresses, I would send CCs. So I would write it and I would just send it out. And it became like this, it became a very big thing. Everybody was waiting for the nectar of the day, and it was called Srila Prabhupada Uvacha, because that's what it was. It was Srila Prabhupada said this, and Srila Prabhupada said that. Someone asked Prabhupada, it describes in the Bhagavatam about this main mountain being so high in the sky, so many miles. And he said, well, Prabhupada, where is it? And Prabhupada said, in the sky. That was it. Prabhupada would give these answers and you just scratch your head, Another one was, and so I was writing all these things down. I stopped doing it. I should have done it for 2 years, but, after a while I just became distracted into my service. So then another one was Prabhupada. They said that in Mahatma Gandhi, when he was shot, did his last words that he chanted, it was Ram, Ram. I said, is that correct? And Prabhupada said, I don't know, I wasn't there. It was so, when you hear these things, you really understand how Prabhupada, how he dealt with things. He was so funny, And also he gave his opinion about Mahatma Gandhi as well, But it was just so funny how he answered things. And sometimes when you would ask a question, is it possible? And Prabhupada would go, why not? Just like it was, ask these questions, so we just have these different answers. But anyway, all this was the nectar, and this was my way of dealing with what I considered to just be gossip on the internet. 2 years ago, I got on Facebook, and all I did was put a Prabhupada quote on every day. I'm still doing it every day. I missed one day the other day when I was traveling, but pretty much it's all I do. Put a picture of Srila Prabhupada and a quote. And whoever clicks on and becomes a friend, they get to see the Prabhupada quote of the day. And I've been going through his letters now for 2 years in this way, picking the letter for the day. Today I haven't done it yet. But this is what we have to do. And this is, Prabhupada would say this, what do you do when you have the bottle of ink? You just start pouring milk in, and just keep pouring and pouring. Ink is very thick, and it sticks to the side. It's not so easy to go away. You have to really pour lots and lots of milk until finally all the ink is gone and you're left with nothing but milk. So this is, Prabhupada said, we say sometimes, when we talked about Hare Krishna as being brainwashed, and Prabhupada said, yes. He said, this is our business. We're washing your brain. He said, your brain is filled with stool, and we're washing your brain. So Prabhupada could take anything, and he would just turn it back on you. This is, Prabhupada would go in and say, the offense. He was never defensive. You could never make Prabhupada like sit and think, how do I respond to this? If you tried to attack him, he would just attack you. On the transcendental platform, the spiritual platform, he would attack you back, so then there wasn't anything you could do. When the reporter would say, they would call him your holiness, or sir, or Swamiji, or whatever. If you're riding, you're riding in a Rolls Royce, all your disciples are teaching him to be detached, to give everything up. They're sleeping on the floor. They knew these things, they're coming out. They're eating off of the floor. We used to eat on sheets of what's it called? Plastic wrap, right? And you just rip it. It was, not the clear stuff, the cloudy stuff. So you rip it. Everybody would have like a 12-inch square on the floor, and then they'd plop your rice and dal right onto this piece of paper that was sitting on the floor. And that's how in the early days in some temples, it's how we didn't have plates, we just had this plastic wrap. So these kind of things would go out. You're making children get up early in the morning, you're eating off the floor, and you're riding in a Rolls Royce. And Prabhupada said, yes. He says, why Rolls Royce? He said, it should be a gold crown. So he just, and then he would explain. He said, they're trying to serve their spiritual masters, giving them Krishna. But he wouldn't think, how do you deal with that? Man, if you're in a college or something, or a school, and they say, hey, well, look at, such and such, he's living in this house and he's doing this. Prabhupada said, yes, So he never had anxiety how to deal with any situation. So on the subject of gossip, and so whether on the internet or wherever, like I said, I was saying, the person who does these things, they're not just doing it on the internet. They do it 24 hours a day. People who are critical, that's all they do, is criticize. This is not devotee. Devotee, he's too busy to criticize. He's too busy trying to make people Krishna conscious, trying to help people become Krishna conscious. This is our business. It's to encourage one another. And if you see somebody struggling, you don't sit back and talk with your friend and say, oh, you know what they just did, No, you try to help them, try to encourage them, try to see how you can help them in what's going on. This is what Prabhupada did. I was with Prabhupada in 1975, and he was in Hawaii temple. And Hawaii temples had a very interesting history from the very early days. And at this point, 1975, the original devotee who opened it up, the temple president, he had sold the temple that was existing. And one devotee, his godbrother, who was living in the temple, he put the down payment on the temple, which he got from his parents, an inheritance. So that's how they bought this temple. So anyway, this devotee who was in charge, basically would say he fell in Maya. So he sold the temple. Everybody left the temple. He gave the devotee back his down payment, and he took everything else. And he went to one of the other islands, and he bought a farm. So gradually things went on. That's when HG Prabhu came on. He bought Prabhupada this very beautiful place. It's still there in Hawaii, where Prabhupada could come and translate. And Prabhupada was staying in this place now. It's called Koela Way. It's about 4 acres of property in one of the nicest areas in Hawaii. It was worth a lot of money. And Prabhupada knew that this devotee was on the other island. And the Big Island is called the Big Island. It's called Hawaii, is the Big Island. So he asked to see. He said, I want to go to the Big Island because ISKCON also had a farm on the Big Island. And he said to the GBC, he said, let's go. He said, we'll go spend a day there. I can go see our farm. So they went, just the two of them. I stayed back in the temple in Honolulu. So he went with his GBC, they went there, and as soon as he got there, Prabhupada said, he asked to see this devotee who had sold the temple and bought himself a place on the same island as far. He asked to see him. So they made some inquiries, and he wasn't to be found, he wasn't there. So then the devotee said to Prabhupada, well, we can go see the farm, our farm. Prabhupada said, no, that's all right. He said, let's go back to Honolulu. So he didn't want to go see the ISKCON farm. He wanted to go search out this devotee, his disciple, who had sold the property, with Tulsi Devis on the property. It was a big scandal in ISKCON. So many. This was an early one. There's so many scandals in ISKCON. So Prabhupada comes back to Honolulu. So there was a carport when you pulled up in front of the temple. Carport, when you drive under, there was a roof. So that carport, the roof of it was a sun deck. That Prabhupada's room opened up onto this sun deck. That's where he would take his massage. Sometimes in his room, if it was sunny out, he would go out there and take his massage. So after a few days, it's just around noontime, and I'm massaging Prabhupada, mustard oil, sandalwood oil on his head. 15 minutes sitting behind him, rubbing. Prabhupada would just sit there and rub his head. And then put the bottle of sandalwood down, and then you get the mustard oil, put some mustard oil in your hands, rub it in, and then you start massaging Prabhupada's back. So you could massage his back for a long time, at least half an hour, as hard as you could. This is what he wanted. He said, as hard as you can massage my back. So that was my workout every day, was massaging Prabhupada's back. It was like just, and he wanted it hard. He wanted you to, because he liked it. So I massage. And one day he said, he laughed at me. He said, this is passive wrestling. Because I was wrestling him, he wasn't fighting back. That's passive, right? Passive. I was wrestling. He said, I'm wrestling. And he'd just sit there like nothing was happening. And I'm putting everything, all the strength I had. And I was, I was thin, but I was kind of strong. And I would just go and go. And sometimes I would get to where I tried in my wrestling, I wanted to defeat him. I wanted him to say, that's hard enough. He never said it. He'd just sit there. You see, Prabhupada wasn't very tall. It wasn't heavy. And no matter how hard you pushed, he never moved. You He's sitting on a mat, which was on the tile floor or wooden floor, and you could push and push and push, and he would just sit. Like he was resting, and he was just working out, and massaging, getting exhausted, and I think sometimes I think deliberately he would do that for me, just to let me see how heavy he was, He grew heavy. Prabhupada was immovable. And he didn't, like if you know massaging, sometimes if you're pressing very hard, they'll like try to fix themselves so you can't push them. Prabhupada just sit and enjoy. And then he said, passive wrestling, he said, you do all the work, I get all the benefit. I was getting all the benefit, and I was getting Prabhupada's mercy. But anyway, he would talk like that. Prabhupada was very sweet and funny and humorous. So that's what I learned with Prabhupada too, that actually devotees did smile and they did laugh. And when I first got to see Prabhupada, I was in the garden in Los Angeles, and it was seeing him laugh. And then I thought, wow, that's Krishna consciousness. It wasn't always this like, boo, like everything was a struggle. He was actually happy. Prabhupada was happy. Prabhupada was jubilant. Prabhupada could laugh. He had a sense of humor. He would say jokes. And I thought, this is wonderful. This is what I want. I didn't, the other side, the gravity, that was difficult for me. Prabhupada said I was easygoing. That was my quality. He said he was easygoing, Srutakirti, easygoing. And I was. But that's okay too, to have that nature. Use that in devotional service. Whatever our nature is, we have to serve Krishna. So this day, I'm massaging Prabhupada inside his sitting room in Honolulu. And now I'm massaging his back. Most things would happen. There were lots of people coming in, Prabhupada would say things. I always found myself massaging his back at the time, because that's where 50% of the massage was just massaging his back. And you had to do it until he went like this. Where he said, okay, you never change spots, because there were various spots. There was his head first, then his back, then I would go to the side, and I would rub his chest, and I would even rub his belly, and then pick out his arm, and do his arm, and then go to the other side, do his arm, and then do one leg, and do his other leg, and then do his feet. So each of these, there's specific areas, and Prabhupada would sit. And you never left that area until he said, okay. That was it. And that was like at 2.5 years. It wasn't that you arrived at a place where you could just decide, because you've been doing it so long, right? Because we would think in service, you do something long enough, you don't need anyone else to tell you. But he had to tell you. And the reason I know is because I tried the opposite. I actually got to a point after a year where I thought, okay, I've massaged his head long enough, it's time to do his back. So I massaged his head, took my hands off, I massaged his back, took my hands off, and went around to the side. And he said, you massage me until I tell you to stop, not until you tell you to stop. So that was the end of that experiment. And I saw every day you just massaged each spot until he told you to stop. So this was servant. This is what it means to serve. You do until you're supposed to do something else. So I'm massaging his back. And who should come in the door was his disciple. Very early, from 1967, he was Prabhupada's disciple. This is 1975. He sold the temple, took the money, shut the place down. The devotees didn't know where they were going to be. So many things. And he comes in the room and he's got kind of like Jesus now. He's got long hair and a beard, scraggly beard, black hair. and he got these very deep-set eyes, very intense looking. I've seen him a few times, but I didn't really know him. And he came in, and he sat before Prabhupada, and he said, Prabhupada, you wanted to see me? And Prabhupada started out very simply, and he just said, how are you? Like that, and everything. And he was like really vague, and like, I don't know, maybe he was mentally on something, or I don't know, but like he really didn't respond to Prabhupada. He just, was okay. And Prabhupada said, he said, what have I done? He said, what is it I've done? He said, that has made you leave. He said, is there something, he said, have I offended you somehow? Is there something I've done? Is there some reason that's caused you to go away? And he just sat there, he was like blank. And Prabhupada just went on, and he said, I want you to come back. I don't want you to be gone, I want you to be here. He said, and Prabhupada had tears in his eyes, and he said, if there's something I've done, he said, please forgive me. Imagine. He didn't say, what have you done with the money? How did you do this? How did so many things he could have said. But all he said was, please come back. He said, you've done so much service. And Prabhupada took it, he said, it must have been something I did. And Prabhupada was in tears. But he didn't respond. And Prabhupada wasn't just a business tactic or something he was using to try to understand, he wasn't trying to manipulate him. This was Prabhupada's feelings. This is genuine, Prabhupada wasn't duplicitous, didn't have strategies. We have strategies to spread Krishna consciousness. But this was his disciple, this was his son. And he saw he's gone away. It's like those of you who are Christian all know the story now, the one sheep that goes away, the herder lets go the whole herd to get the one. This is a devotee, this is what they do. One person, he had wandered off, and Prabhupada just wanted him to come back. He said, whatever it is you need, he said, whatever it is has to be done. He said, he just wanted him to come back. And he just didn't respond at that time. And Prabhupada just said, okay. So then he left. And Prabhupada was very emotional. And then I'm still massaging his back. I'm just massaging his back the whole time and just being a witness. A witness to it. And then Prabhupada said, he's a big rascal. He said, but I love him. And he didn't say anything else. So this is our position. Rascals. That's what we've been talking about as a bunch of rascals. But Prabhupada has attachment. As soon as you do some service, and more service, so many of these devotees, in the beginning, Prabhupada was just so appreciative, traveling here and there, opening up centers, making devotees, doing Harinam, so many things. Prabhupada was just grateful that they helped him. It was one of the early sannyasis. Sannyasis from the very beginning, Prabhupada was making sannyasis, and the sannyasis were going away. So this was also 1975. And it was one of Prabhupada's sannyasis who had fallen down. When you say fallen down, he had gotten married, and so much time had gone by, he already had a child. He had a wife and a child. And he was living in Mexico City at this time. In 1975, in February, Prabhupada went to Mexico City and he stayed there for a week. So as soon as he got there, of course, he said, where is... He asked to see him. Of course, he was feeling very shy because he had been a sannyasi. Now he was a grahasta with a child. And Prabhupada said, where is he? So he was around. So Prabhupada said, get him. So I went to God, Prabhupada wants to see you. And these words, whenever I went anywhere in the temple, so Prabhupada wants to see you, would like strike fear in your heart. It wasn't like a good, he wants to see me because, Prabhupada generally didn't want to see you just to say, Haribol, how you doing? Because he had some reason to see you, something you might have done, something he wanted you to do that maybe you wouldn't want to do. So when he said he wants to see you, then, that could be create some anxiety. So I said, Prabhupada wants to see you. Okay, he said. So he went, and of course he went in, he was very humble, he was feeling fallen and ashamed, embarrassed. And Prabhupada, of course, immediately, Prabhupada was, how are you doing? And he said, Prabhupada, I'm okay, I'm here at the temple. He said, is it okay? I'm staying. And Prabhupada looked at him and said, yes. He said, I was next to Prabhupada, sitting there, and Prabhupada pointed to me. He said, so now you're a grahastha like Srutakirti. He said, I had been a brahmachari, Prabhupada's servant, then I was gone for 8 months, and then now I was a grahastha as Prabhupada's servant. So it didn't matter. The cloth had changed colors, and the service was the same. Just went on in the same way. So he said, a couple times he did this with sannyasis. He said, now you're a grahastha like Srutakirti. He said, so just go on and do your service as a grahastha. He said, be peaceful, be happy, do your service. And then he said, Lord Chaitanya, he said, he's God, Krishna himself. He said he could even make the animals chant and dance. He said, this was Lord Chaitanya. He said, but I'm not Lord Chaitanya. He said, I need all the help I can get. So this was Prabhupada's attitude. Whatever your condition, never give up doing whatever it is you can do in devotional service. Even if you consider it insignificant, you have to do it. Don't think I can't do everything. I'm going to do nothing. This is what's required of me. This is Maya at her greatest, making you think that you're not allowed to do anything because you're not doing this properly, you're not doing this properly. There is no, this process, it's the means and it's the end. Okay? When you reach the end, there is no end because we're always increasing in devotional service. But at any point, whether you're up here or you're back down here, just do something. And this is what Prabhupada wanted from any position you're in, serve Krishna, that's all. So then he was feeling better, this devotee. And then he said, well, Prabhupada, I have a son, And he said, we named him Abai. And Prabhupada was like, okay. He said, very nice. I was thinking, Prabhupada was thinking, oh, Krishna, we named him after Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, okay. But this was Prabhupada's mentality with all of his followers, all of his disciples. Always he would say, don't do this, do this. But then when something happened, it was okay, now do your service. Whatever it is, just do your service, just go on. It's the only means for purification. It's the only atonement possible, is to engage in devotional service, chant Hare Krishna, to whatever capacity. Famous word Prabhupada uses over and over, according to your capacity. So sometimes our capacity might change from one place to another. Right? We're human. Right? We're fallible. We make mistakes, commit mistakes. We cheat. All these things are there. It's in our propensity. But whatever it is, you just have to, again, engage in the process of devotional service to the best. And by others' encouragement, this is the need for that association. This is one of the points Devaki Mataji was making. You have to have personal association, not just off of some screen, off of this. We need each other's assistance, not personal association. However we can get it, we need it. But to be in a temple atmosphere is very significant, very important, very helpful. On a morning walk in Hawaii, devotees there was this big discussion about living in the temple or not living in the temple. You had these devotees who were saying, if you're not living in the temple, if you're not coming to the temple, you're in Maya. That was it. And then once you go outside, if we don't see you in the temple in the morning, you must be in Maya, because you're not coming to the temple. In those days, basically that was a fact. You were either in the temple or you weren't in the temple. So if you were not in the temple, and then you're just in Maya. So this devotee, and he was at GBC in that time in Los Angeles, and he's trying to get Prabhupada to say, is that correct? So Prabhupada wouldn't say that it was correct. He said, no, it's possible one can be Krishna conscious. He said, outside the temple. He said, but it's just like the wood. Right? You know all about wood here now. Everywhere I go, it's stacks and stacks and stacks of wood. But do you leave it outside for the winter so it gets rained on all summer long? No, it's always covered so it stays dry. Why keep it covered? Why do you keep it dry? Because otherwise you can't start a fire. Right? I mean, you could bring wet wood into your home and keep lighting matches and putting newspaper and kindling, and eventually, maybe after a few hours or a few days, if you leave that log in there with the rest of the fire, it will light. So that's the example Prabhupada used. He said, one can become Krishna conscious. He said, outside of the association of devotees. He said, but it'll take a very, very, very long time. He said, but if you're in the association, he said, very quickly, he said, you could become, because we watch one another, we're very good at seeing other people's faults and helping them correct their faults. Prabhu, this is a famous way you say Prabhu. First you say master, my master, everything you're doing is wrong. This is how we use Prabhu. It's very rare when you say Prabhu, what is it I can do? How can I serve you? This is what should follow that word, Prabhu. It's Prabhu, how can I serve you? But usually we say, Prabhu, where were you this morning? And Prabhu, why didn't you do? Why didn't you clean this? Why didn't you were supposed to do this and supposed to do that? So, but that is humbling, which is good. It's good to be humble, because you can't approach the spiritual master and Krishna without humility. You can't approach Krishna without humility, not possible. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we're just insignificant, 1/10,000th part, the tip of a hair. So Krishna consciousness is all about becoming humble. So association is very good at helping us become humble, because usually people are very good at telling you what to do, what not to do, what you should do, but in a positive way as well. We should become mature enough to understand how to encourage one another, not criticize one another, but encourage one another to see where that spark is in Krishna consciousness. And pure devotee, he's expert. He knows just how to fan, like you do when you have your fire. You have those things, how to start your fire, and you have that thing, what's it called? The bellows, we say in English, the bellows. So, when you get it started, you go, so the right amount of air will increase the fire. If you do it too hard, you blow it right out. And if you don't do it enough, it will also go out. But if you become expert, then you know just how much pressure to put, just how much to fan to increase the fire. That's the spiritual master. He knows exactly what to do for each individual. It's not the same. Some people, you do too much and it'll go away. Others, you have to press them. They require so much pressure to make advancement. So the devotee, he understands what's best for each individual, and he does that. And that can also vary at different times, just like this devotee when he came in. So all Prabhupada had to say is, what can I do? You know, Prabhupada saying, how can I save you? Just tell me, how can I save you from Maya? Because Prabhupada's compassion was so great that he would just be so sad to see someone who's gone away from Krishna. He just wants to bring them back. So when we become like this, then we can understand we're making advancement in Krishna consciousness. And there's so many ways, so many barometers, where we can measure. One way is to see how much compassion you have for other living entities, especially those who are devotees, those who are in your very same family or ISKCON family. How much eager you are to see them make advancement. And if you're eager, then you know, actually you're becoming advanced. Never think you're advanced, because it's a natural feeling. You just want to help others, and that humility is there. But if your idea is, this person should be gone, this person, better they all leave, they're all nonsense, this one's nonsense, then that means that they're a very neophyte person, a neophyte devotee. So we have to work, we have to practice, to make some progress, become a little compassionate towards other living entities. Are there any questions so far? Comments? Yes.
Could you kindly share the event that took place and how you became a part of Prabhupada's entourage? Is it possible?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Please.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. I heard that Srila Prabhupada discouraged us to read his own guru and other acharya. Is it right? And nowadays there is many books from different acharyas in English, and we just don't know, shall I read, shall I not read? So, and why?
You'll find places where Prabhupada encourages the reading of previous acharyas in our line. As long as they're in our line and we understand. Because what he wanted foremost was that we read and understand his books. And there's a point where one is, there should be a point where one is fixed up enough, mature enough in Krishna consciousness that they can read others. Myself, I haven't gotten through Prabhupada's books enough to read in other things. It's certainly enough just to read Prabhupada's books. It's not required to read any other books. But he encourages different disciples to do translating work with the different Vaishnava acharyas as well. So it's authorized. It's authorized by Prabhupada, just like the works Gopi Puranadana did. And him in particular, I feel very happy seeing anyone or myself reading his, because he stuck so much to Prabhupada's mood, and he never, Gopi Puranadana, what made him so, one of the things, he was a great scholar, but he always considered himself just to be an insignificant disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and stuck. He didn't have anything to add or subtract. He would just do translation work, and he was very expert at it. And that's very reassuring. Someone doesn't have something to add in to what's been put there by different Vaishnavas in our line. So I'm just mentioning him because him I know in particular. Whatever he's done, I feel like the seal of approval. I remember one day I was with him at a festival in Russia, and someone was asking about a name, giving a child a name. And the devotee said this, well, you can name, it was a girl, someone had a baby girl. So they said, could you pick a name? And they said to Gopi, well, someone has picked this name. And Prabhupada said, Gopi said, well, that's masculine. And then I said to Gopi Pranadana, I said, well, Prabhupada gave it to one of our god sisters, this very same name. And then immediately said, Prabhupada did it, then it's okay. Like that was it, there was no question. Where you had, within our society, in the early days and the present days, you had people that became Sanskrit scholars, and they wound up going away in time because they would see things in a way and think, well, Prabhupada, this translation of this was, could have been this, it could have been that. So they made the massive offense of thinking they had become better than their spiritual master. They knew more than Prabhupada. So that was a great offense. And then, again, you become a mouse. And that's what happened many, many times. But Gopi Pranadam was always just very fixed on Prabhupada's mood and just doing whatever Prabhupada wanted. So I'm sure there's many other literatures that are there by different devotees that are okay. But the emphasis has to be on Prabhupada's books. How many hundreds and hundreds of times did he say, everything is in my books? So we have to fix ourselves on that and understand his books. Like he was saying this morning, Vaisheshika has a program, a chapter a day of Gita. And I was thinking, wow, 18 chapters, I mean, you go through the Gita like 20 times a year. And I was talking about that man the other day I met in India just recently who he's become very fixed up devotee, reading Prabhupada's books. I never met Prabhupada, just 2 years ago. He's read the Gita 17 times since then. And he just loves reading Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. He's just in love with reading Prabhupada's Gita. Does that answer? No? Yes? Okay. Someone here? A question?
I have a question.
Yes?
You are so close with Srila Prabhupada for 2 years, and we know that it is little dangerous for disciples to be so close because of reality. It's like that. Did you have some difficulty in person?
Yeah, we have difficulty.
And how you overcame it?
I still have difficulty. Well, at times it is. It's a scary thing because your mind, you can become offensive sometimes. If you see when you're with someone and you think, well, this is... With me, it was a simple thing sometimes, especially after 2 years or so, where you have this thing where sometimes you just don't want to do something, You just like tired or something, or you feel tested, And for that to happen with your spiritual master, with Prabhupada, that was, be a scary thing. And I saw it within me on occasion, and I knew it was not a good thing in general. I always had so much of my own conflicts that I never arrived at that level of feeling very advanced. See, that's something when you think you're advanced, so then you become critical of others. This is why we criticize, we become critical, because we think we ourselves are so advanced. So that can also happen with spiritual masters. I was telling that story yesterday about seeing my godbrother fighting with Prabhupada. God could never ever do that. I never, Prabhupada yelled at me, I would say nothing. If he would say, you're such a fool, I go, yes, I would agree, because I didn't want him to go on chastising me, So I would try to take the tactic of saying anything to stop it, because I just didn't like getting yelled at. So that was my position, and in many ways it saved me. I was kind of simple. I'm not a very philosophical person. Yadabar said this morning, he's not philosophical. I'm not a philosophical person. From the very beginning I came, I wanted to know God. And the devotees told me who he was, and that was it. it all sounded good. They answered all my simple questions. And I hadn't read any other philosophies. I didn't know anything about Eastern philosophy. And when I was with Prabhupada, he always amazed me. So that was a good protection, to be amazed by how wonderful he was and seeing how he acted with everyone. I admired how he dealt with everyone. And I saw, I came later on, I think, which was safer for me, because it was 71. So already Prabhupada was established. He was the Acharya of the whole world. 67, he was a Swamiji who had come to America, and he was talked about establishing a worldwide society, and everyone loved him. But their relationship was much more intimate and personal. So when I came in awe and reverence of Prabhupada. So that from the start, I think that was a protection. And then Prabhupada had to teach me how to be comfortable being in his presence so that I could do my service. Because if you're not, if you're not comfortable, how can you do anything? How can you do your service? So very quickly, when I became a servant, he taught me how to relax. He was saying how to become Prabhupada's servant. I was just in New Vrindavan, and at that time I was in the kitchen. New Vrindavan, I guess it was a farm. We had no running water. It was just a farmhouse. It wasn't a big temple. It was a farmhouse that they had bought, 2 stories. There was a well outside, so there was no running water inside. There was an outhouse outside. We bathed outside somewhere. And there was a stove. It had no gas. It was a wood stove. So it was very primitive in the early days there. Although it was 1972. And Prabhupada came to New Vrindavan and he didn't have a servant. So he stayed there for a week. And as Mataji was saying, that whole week I was in the kitchen, so I didn't even hear a class he had given. Just like here you have the devotees, they're busy in the kitchen doing puja, or you people live here, you have so many things to do. You don't get to attend the festival that you're presenting to everyone, because you're busy doing service. That's how I was. There was hundreds of devotees in New Vrindavan to see Prabhupada. And I wanted to see him too. But I didn't attend one class for the week that he was there because I was in the kitchen cooking. And the day before he left, the evening before he left, Kirtanananda came into the kitchen. It was like 8 o'clock at night, and I was preparing Mangalartik sweets for the deities, which, we've made nice sweets there. We made burfi and sweet rice and sandesh, all milk sweets, nice pure milk sweets. So this is what I did every evening. So he came into the kitchen and he just walked up to me and said, "So, do you want to be Prabhupada's servant?" And that was it. I was, 20-year-old brahmachari in the temple for 16 months. So I said, yes. And he said, okay, you'll leave with him tomorrow morning. So 5 o'clock in the morning, I met him as a servant. And Kirtananda introduced him to me, and that's how I became a servant. Prabhupada had nothing to do with it. And it was Kirtananda, and we needed someone, and he had 2 brahmacharis he considered were capable of doing it. Myself and my godbrother Kuladri. And for whatever reason, it fell onto me. So then I left with Prabhupada. And of course, I was complete anxiety. I had no idea. I wasn't trained to do it. In a sense, I knew how to cook. When Kirtanananda introduced me in the morning, he said, "This is Srutakirti," and I'm just sitting there like, sweating. And he said, and Prabhupada he said, "He's going to be your servant." Kirtananda said, "This is Srutakirti, he's going to be your servant." Prabhupada just looked up. And that was it. Oh my gosh. And then he said, Kirtanananda said, "He's a very good cook, but he doesn't know how to massage." And then Prabhupada said, "Anyone can massage." Which wasn't true. He wanted to be very good at it. But that was the first thing he said to make me kind of, not be in anxiety. So then we drove off to Pittsburgh, which is like you driving to Stockholm from here. We went from the farm to the city. So we drove from New Vrindavan to Pittsburgh, which was about a 2-hour drive. And that was my first day with him in the temple. And now I'm a servant. And I still didn't know how to massage. I didn't even know what to cook or how I was going to cook. I didn't know anything. Nobody told me really anything or trained me or anything. It was very, if you think about it, it was very bizarre. So Prabhupada was in the sitting room, and I was in what was his bedroom, because there was not a servant's quarters. Pittsburgh was a small place, rented house. So I was sitting in what was Prabhupada's bedroom at the time, and I had a suitcase in front of me, and now I have my little bag. I didn't have much of anything. When I was a farm boy in New Vrindavan, we hardly wore dhotis, because it was a muddy place. As soon as you walked out the temple room, you were in mud. So I'm just looking at Prabhupada's things, and I was also, this was the first time I was ever just sitting. I never sat as a devotee, outside of the morning program. You were always doing something. We didn't sit around. In the cities, you were out on Harinam, selling magazines, BTG magazines, or working in the temple, cleaning the temple, or in the kitchen. There's no question of just sitting. But here I was now, I'm just sitting on the floor, looking at Prabhupada's suitcase, just looking at what's inside, a sweater, saffron sweater, saffron cloth, and he didn't have that much either, It's Prabhupada, it was just this one suitcase. And there was this big thing, it was this cooker, a brass cooker, and I'm looking at that, trying to figure out, what the heck, how do you use that thing, I knew it was a cooking device, but I didn't know how to use it. And the bell rang. So that was the one instruction I had. Your duty as a servant, when he rings his bell, you answer it. That's the servant. His secretary told me that, China-sundar. He said, when he rings the bell, you answer it. So I'm sitting in the room, completely mystified and anxiety, and I hear this ringing. And, bell went off in my head. And I thought, it's Prabhupada. So I got up and I just ran into the room. It was just, the next room was right there. So I got up, ran in the room, offered obeisances, and I sat up, and my heart's pounding, And I said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, I said, what can I do? He just looked at me, and he just had like a little smile. He said, nothing. He said, I just wanted to see how fast you were. And then he smiled again, and all my anxiety, all my fear, everything, it just disappeared, just seeing that smile. And Prabhupada was so expert. That was what he did the first time he rang the bell, was take away all my fear, all my anxiety. He just took it away with just one laugh and one funny little, He was serious. He wanted to see if I was going to respond. He's sitting in his room. I guess he thought, let me see what happens. So he rang the bell, and there I was. I appeared before him. So then I just kind of smiled, and I said, anything else? He said, no. He didn't want anything. He just wanted to see how fast I was. So then I'm still sitting there, and I still don't know what I'm supposed to do now, because now I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, well, should I just sit here? I said, should I go now? He said, yes. So then I left, and I waited for the bell to ring again. But then the next time it was easier. There wasn't that anxiety. So that's the first thing he did. He was so expert. He just had to do everything properly. So that's how it became. Yes? No? You see anyone else? Yes?
The other day you were speaking about, I'm sorry I forgot the context, but some devotee came to Prabhupada and Prabhupada asked a question and he answered it and you said you learned long ago not to do that. But if Prabhupada asks a question, is it wrong to ask?
No, Prabhupada would ask, on a morning walk, Prabhupada would ask a question. There was a group of devotees, so there might be 10 to 20 devotees. Not that he specifically, of course, if he asked me a question, I would answer him. That was not a, there's no question. I mean, that's what you would do. But I'm saying there were times, just personally, from my experience, that I would shy away from these general questions when I put up a philosophical topic and ask for a response. I would rather somebody else answer because, I was, it's my personality. There's that A-type personality that's very eager as soon as you say something. They have the answer, even if it's a wrong answer, because they want to answer. I've seen that too. Prabhupada said, who's on that statue? Because he walked in parks a lot in different cities. He would be in different parks. So I remember, being in this one park, and he asked, who is on that statue? And the devotee that answered him wasn't from that city or anything, but he said, Prabhupada, that's probably such and such. Well, it wasn't. But he gave Prabhupada an answer right away, because Prabhupada asked the question. Now me, I would have never said, well, probably such and such. But when I was with him personally, we were on an airplane, and it was back in the day when they had the one screen at the front of the airplane, In each compartment there would be a big screen, and they would show the movies on the screen. And then, of course, you would have to get your headsets and put them on, and you could listen. So, obviously, we didn't ever rent headsets or take them, even if they were free. But the movie was going on, nonetheless. So Prabhupada's sitting by the window, where he always sat, and then I'm sitting next to him. So when there's something on a television screen, a big movie screen, it's very hard not to see it, and just your eyes are just drawn there. So we're both sitting, and imagine sitting next to Prabhupada for 10 hours in an airplane, what you would do for 10 hours. And then think that's what it was like to be with Prabhupada. You would have to try to be as Krishna conscious as you could. So you're always chanting, chant 10 hours a day, 10 hours in a week, 10 hours but in a flight, in an airplane. But you would have to, at least not fall asleep. He didn't like you sleeping at Maya. Sleeping is Maya. It's always Maya, sleeping. So anyway, we're sitting there, and then Prabhupada, we're watching this movie, kind of, seeing, so Prabhupada's looking, I'm looking off and on, and it's a Western, it was a typical American Western movie, cowboy hats and all that stuff. And there was these scenes going on. Anyway, there was this one cowboy, and he was all in black, and he had a black hat. He was dressed in black, and then he had this book, under his arm, in his hand, this book. And so we're sitting there, and Prabhupada's chanting, and I'm chanting, and Prabhupada said, "What's that book?" I'm not watching the movie, I'm not listening to the movie, and I'm looking, and I said, I think it's the Bible. Because I figured he was in black, he was probably a priest, and it was probably a Bible. So it would have been seeing a Hare Krishna at the airport with a book. It's a Bhagavad Gita. So I said, it's probably the Bible. And Prabhupada said, yes. So I was, being in that situation. I had no idea, but they came up with the best answer I could. It was the Bible. I don't know what it was. But I wanted to answer. That's what you wanted to do when he asked the question, was give him an answer. We were at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Beautiful. They had a beautiful lawn, English garden out front, English lawn. It was like a polo lawn or something, very flat and raised. And it's where you see the pictures, Prabhupada sitting on the lawn. He has a pretty chadar around him. What color is that chadar? Blue, white, anyway. And so Prabhupada was looking out the window on this lawn, and it's park, and there's trees. And Prabhupada was looking out there, and he said, and I'm sitting in his room. There's nobody else there. Many times it was like that. And he said, what's the most beautiful animal? So now, again, I'm like, And again, my nature was, I'm a Vata personality, so I become anxious. Vata means air. You have three, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So they all have different general characteristics. And they're always mixed up, a little of this, a little of that. No one's, don't have many pure anythings. So my Vata was my biggest. So Vata, when you're hungry, you become nervous, anxious. This is like your subplot, is your anxiety, Pitta, they're fiery. So if anyone is associated with somebody that's Pitta, fire, when they're hungry, they get angry. They're angry people. That's their thing. So whenever Prabhupada would say something to me, my first instinct was I get nervous. Because I wanted to do the right thing, What's the right thing? This is Krishna consciousness. Always, what's the proper thing to do? So then I'm thinking, what's the most beautiful animal? What do I know about anything? So the only thing I could think was cow. Right? Come on, Krishna loves his cows. So I said a cow. Prabhupada looked at me. He said a horse. A horse, of course. An old English show. A horse, of course. A horse is the most beautiful animal. If you see a horse, anything about animals, what's more beautiful than a horse? The muscle structure, the body, everything, they're beautiful. So then I just, of course, I said, yes, Prabhupada. I would agree with him. I realized saying a cow, which cows are kind of clumsy. If you look at a cow, they're beautiful. I still think cows, if you're at Govardhan and you see those Sarabi cows and the little calves, I just like, oh, they're babies. I just want to hug them all the time. But Prabhupada said the horse. And then artistically, that's considered the most beautiful animal. So Prabhupada knew, he understood. And another day he's looking out the window. And the birds were flying. I guess, and there were pigeons, as there are everywhere. I haven't noticed any here, but in most city areas you have the pigeons, nasty birds. Like the rats of the bird world, pigeons. So it flew by and Prabhupada looked at me. He said, if you have a boil, he said, you put pigeon droppings on it. Pigeon stool. He said, the droppings from the pigeon you put on the boil, he said, and then draw it out. And he said that to me, it was 1973. So since then, I must have told that to like 20 devotees with boils. And they always look at me. No one ever put pigeon stool on their boils. No one has done it yet. And I haven't had a boil since that time. But, that's just what he said. So like all these, anything could happen. Prabhupada was so much fun because you never knew what he would do, what he would say. Another time on the airplane, Air India flight, and we're sitting in this big, like 747, and we're just sitting waiting. Prabhupada was always in economy. First time he flew first class was 1975. Imagine. This was Prabhupada. From 67 to 75, never, always was in economy, coach in the airplane. And he would sit by the window, the servant would sit next to him. And if there was ample room, then you would just give him the whole row, you'd sit behind him like that. But if it was crowded, it was just Prabhupada, servant and secretary like that. So this flight was just him and I were side by side on the plane. Prabhupada's at the window, and the plane hasn't even taken off. People are boarding. But we got on early, and we're sitting, and it's Air India, and it's in India, and the music's playing, coming from all the speakers, and it's classical Indian music. It's tabla and sitar, it was a raga. And I'm just sitting there, trying to mind my own business, which I always did. I just tried to be invisible. That was my goal. Just be invisible and wait for him to want something. So he just, he looked at me, he said, "How do you like this music?" Now it was classical Indian music, but nobody was chanting Hare Krishna, you know. So as soon as he asked me how I liked it, I became an anxiety because I thought, what's the right answer? Because I always thought he was testing, you know, my Krishna consciousness, which is foolish because he always knew I was in Maya. I was never Krishna conscious. I was never thinking about Krishna. I was always just wondering what I'm supposed to do, you know, trying to stay out of the way, do my service, chant. So he said, "How do you like it?" So immediately I became afraid. I thought, well, if I say I like it, you might say this is Maya, sense gratification. So I just looked at him, and he smiled. He said, "It's very nice." And I said, "Yes, Prabhu." And then I thought, you know, looking back, I think, why couldn't I just say, he was just asking me a simple question. He wasn't judging me, you know. It's not like we're under judgment all the time. Prabhupada just saw we were just doing our service, and he just wanted my opinion if I cared for that type of music, that was all. And I thought I missed that opportunity. Of course, the funny thing is, he's asked that to other devotees. One devotee said, "Do you like this music?" The devotee said, "Yes, very nice." Prabhupada said, "It's sense gratification." So that's what I didn't want him to say to me. He said, "Nonsense, that's sense gratification." I called it sense gratification music. It was always just wonderful to be in his presence. And whatever he did, if he chastised you, if he complimented you.
Maybe you are in love, just.
The funny thing was, even as his servants, sometimes he would compliment you to other people, but very rarely would he say anything to you complimentary. I mean, sometimes he said, like, the sandesh I made was first class, because sandesh was a very important part of his diet. So to make first class sandesh was a good thing. But one day after lunch, in his cooker, it was in Mayapur, Jamal Krishna Maharaj came up to him and said, because he liked what I cooked, Jamal Krishna Maharaj, and he was very picky, very fussy, but somehow or other he liked it, and he said to Prabhupada, Srutakirti is first class cook, and I was there in the room, so, and Prabhupada looked and he smiled, he said, "Yes." He said, "He's first class, makes first class American prasadam." So that was what we call backhanded compliment. In other words, I have no idea how to cook anything nice, Vedic, you know, properly, but I made nice American prasadam, Prabhupada called it. So, yeah, we all laughed. So it's, we've run over time, so I think we'll stop here today. We'll be back tomorrow morning. One more question? Someone different? Everyone's okay? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you.